Good afternoon. My name is Maureen Hughes, and I am the Director of Training and Resource Development at the Literacy Coalition of New Brunswick. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our Literacy and Essential Skills in the Workplace webinar series. Today we present the second webinar in the series, Organizational Training Needs Assessment, How, When, and Why. Our presenter today is Mary Lou Doucette from the Workplace Essential Skills Program in St. John. Before I introduce Mary Lou, though, I'd like to draw your attention to the dashboard on the right side of your screen. You will see a chat box in which you can participate in text chatting during the webinar. For this webinar, we encourage you to use your chat box for any questions that you may have about the content so that Mary Lou can respond to your questions periodically throughout the webinar. You will also see a question box in which you can send questions to me if you have a question of a technical nature. I will respond as quickly as possible during the webinar. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, Mary Lou Doucette. Mary Lou is an Implementation and Delivery Officer with Workplace Essential Skills, or WESS, in St. John. The WESS program is offered by the Province of New Brunswick to provide free training in workplace essential skills. In her role as Implementation and Delivery Officer, Mary Lou provides organizational needs analysis to determine training needs. She has a Bachelor of Business Administration from the University of New Brunswick with a major in Human Resource Management and is a certified human resource professional. She is currently a member of the Board of Directors of the Human Resources Association of New Brunswick. Mary Lou's past employment includes over 10 years' experience assisting multi-barriered clients to become attached to the workforce. A recording of Mary Lou's webinar will be available on the Literacy Coalition of New Brunswick's website. Welcome, Mary Lou.
Thank you, Maureen. I want to welcome everybody here this afternoon to the Organizational Needs Assessment webinar, How, When, and Why. As Maureen explained, I am the Implementation and Delivery Officer with the Workplace Essential Skills team in St. John. My plan today is to talk to you about my perspective on how I do an Organizational Needs Assessment with the Workplace Essential Skills program in the St. John region. So it is from that perspective. I did want to give you some information about our program. So the first link there on your screen is a link that explains a little bit about the Workplace Essential Skills program that the province offers. And the second link is contact information for each of the regional coordinators. So the program is available in all areas of the province. And there is a team that is available in your area, and the contact information you can find through that link that's posted on that slide. Okay, so the Workplace Essential Skills program, as Maureen said, we provide free training to help people increase their essential skills. We work with 3 different streams of learners. We work with employers to help their employees increase essential skills, which is our employed stream. We work with unemployed learners through nonprofits and social development and employment, to help them build the skills necessary to find and keep work, and also for everyday living. And we also work with apprentices to help apprentices learn the skills necessary to pass their block exams and their journey person exams or the Red Seal exams. Today I'm going to focus specifically on the employed stream and how I would work and do an organizational needs assessment with an employer for employed learners. So the next slide identifies the non-essential skills. I'm hopefully you're all aware of what they are, and so that's just there for your reference. So what I found in the past is most employers will recognize that there is a problem. Most companies become aware that there's something that's not quite right, there's a perceived lack of skill in some area for their employees. And some examples that I've indicated there are, following written directions, completing documentation correctly, communicating in an assertive or professional manner, things like that, working in a team or solving problems, things like that. I know we had one employer come to us with the concern that they were changing from an assembly line format where their employees didn't have to do any problem solving at all. They would just call the foreperson over to solve the problem, and they were switching to a line where they would be required to work in cells, work cells, where they would be required to problem solve in a group, which was a totally new concept to to that employer. So they were quite concerned about people's abilities to do that. I do want to mention, if you do have any questions during the webinar, as Maureen said, send them off to her and I'll address them as I go through the webinar, or if I realize that your question is going to be addressed in a later slide, I will wait till I get to that slide to address it. So the other thing I want to mention is sometimes employers don't realize that there's an essential skills need. Sometimes the symptoms or the indicators of an essential skill requirement, training requirement, has to do with things like high staff turnover or high absenteeism can be an indicator. Difficulty meeting goals or on-the-job accidents, those are all things that can be going on in the workplace that could be an indicator of that you may have an essential skills challenge or training issue to be dealt with. And that list comes from the Essential Skills Organizational Needs Assessment, which I'll be providing the link to later in the webinar. So, why and when to do an organizational needs assessment, and why is that important? It's really important to do it before you start training. It helps you identify the issues, the real issues, and what the needs are for training. I just had this conversation with somebody this afternoon who had been involved with other programs similar to us, and she was pretty sure she understood how everything went, and I was trying to explain to her that no, we do things a little differently now. We come in and we do a whole organizational needs assessment, which can take 6 to 8 hours of time spread out over a few weeks to get that information. So we identify the real issues or the needs for training. We really want to understand the employer's expected level of performance for the job tasks, learn where employees may need the improvement, and sometimes we may even determine that there's not an essential skills problem. I know in one instance it ended up that management felt that employees needed document use training, and when after we did the organizational needs assessment, we realized that it wasn't that they needed training, it was that the forms had changed several times, and they just needed to know for sure which form they were needing to use, and so it eliminated a need for training, which in the end can save some time and some money. So that's a big feature. So now, how to do an organizational needs assessment. So this is basically a list of the tasks that are involved in doing the organizational needs assessment. They are not necessarily linear. We don't do one after the other. Sometimes we float back and forth in between different stages. But in order to put them on paper, I had to put them in some sort of order, and there is some semblance of an order here. So we're going to start with doing some research. I'm going to cover right up into determining the learners in this webinar. The rest of it is something we don't have time to address during this training. So how do you do an organizational needs assessment? In the beginning, it's basically to do some research, do a little bit of research. We do a little bit of research on the company, find out if we can find out anything about the workplace culture, just the company in general, history, how long they've been around, what kind of work they do if we're not familiar with the company. And then I make contact with the employer to, just as I said earlier, to discuss the process and all the details that happen and all the things that need to happen before training actually starts. And to set a time and date to meet to start that process of the organizational needs assessment. And during that first phone call, I really like to figure out which occupations the employer or the HR person thinks that we're going to be training. Because depending on which occupation we're going to be training on, that will determine which profile, essential skills profile, I'll start with in order to build the organizational needs assessment with. So, and then once I have that idea of which job profile or which occupations, then I start to research the essential skills profile. So, what is an essential skills profile? An essential skills profile is the starting place for the organizational needs assessment. It is a document that's provided by Human Resources, or HRSDC, Human Resources Development Canada. And what it does is it identifies the job tasks of an occupation as they relate to the 9 essential skills. So it breaks down job tasks into a list of essential skills, which I'll show you in a moment. I've put a couple of links on this slide. The first one is just basically the search page where you can search out different essential skills, and then the second one is an alphabetic list of all the profiles. For me, for some reason, searching, I don't seem to get what I'm looking for, so I find it easier for me just to go through the list and try and find which one best suits what it is I'm looking for. So what is a profile? A profile, as I said, it lists the 9 essential skills and sample job tasks that may be required in that occupation for that skill. So this is a sample screenshot of the profile for visiting homemakers, housekeepers, and related occupations. And this was the closest one I could find for a personal support worker. So when I searched personal support worker, I couldn't find this one, and that's why I found it looking through the alphabetic list. Here in St. John, I've worked with 3 different organizations, 3 different companies that provide personal support, home support, and learned a lot about the profile working with those 3 different companies. So in the very first of the profile, there's the introduction, and it just lists a basic idea of what a visiting homemaker or a personal support worker would do. In the middle of the screen, you'll see most important essential skill, and in this particular profile, it lists oral communication and problem solving, which when we came to find out during our organizational needs assessment, one of the skills that the employers found there was a lack in skill was in documentation. It's not necessarily important to actually physically do the job in the home, but it is very important to document what happened in the home for recording purposes and for shift changes and to keep track of people's health and where things have changed. So that was an indication where sometimes those most important skills are bang on in what we're looking at, and sometimes during the organizational needs assessment something else will come out that will show us that there's another need for training. So the next screen here is just a sample of the document use section of the personal support worker profile, and it just gives some basic tasks that somebody may be required to do in this job. Things from reading street work down to more complex tasks such as reviewing client files and updating client files, filling out progress reports or logs on care given to clients. Point where we would start to use the profile to make those tasks employer specific and speak to employers about the level of skill necessary to perform these tasks. So after I get the profile, the generic profile from the website, I'll go through that, and then we'll have that original meeting with the employer. So when we do meet, I like to start off with just basically having a brainstorming session or facilitating a session. I find usually the first meeting is with somebody from HR, and it takes a little bit of time to build some rapport and to have people be comfortable talking to an outside consultant coming in about the challenges with their workforce. So it's really good to take some time to build that rapport. It is really nice to have a manager or supervisor in that initial meeting, but I find sometimes that just requires a second meeting, because in the beginning, that first meeting, the HR person really just wants to get an understanding of what it is we're looking for and what it is we're trying to find out. So generally that meeting happens first. When we're in this meeting, I like to let the employer know that, at this point early on, I just want to hear where they're at, and I try not to lead with any direct questions. So in the beginning, I like to ask lots of open-ended questions. For example, what is your biggest HR challenge? What are the tasks, the job tasks that you continually have to train on? What challenge do you hope that this training will solve? And the more we get speaking with the employer, the standard line that I hear over and over again is, my employees are great, but, or my employees are really good at their job and they really know they're really good. So for example, with the home support worker, They're really good with the client. They're compassionate and they're caring, but they just can't seem to complete this paperwork correctly so that we know what happened when they were in the home. So just some examples of some of the things that I've heard is my employees are great, but sometimes they just don't speak up for themselves when a client or a client's family is being aggressive or asking them to do something that they know is not part of the contract. And that would be an oral communication, learning how to speak assertively and communicate without offending the customer, the fact that they can't do certain things in the home. The next one says, my employees are great, but they don't fill out their timesheets properly, and the office staff spends way too much time tracking down the information to make sure they get paid properly. And as that came up early, you can see that that would be a document use essential skill training. So after that initial brainstorming session, and we get some ideas on where they're at, and your list, I listen to what they're saying and try and think out what essential skill they're talking about. Then I begin to ask more specific or more strategic questions. So you've got some sample ones up there. I would use some of the information that I gathered in the earlier questions to get an understanding. I might dig deeper into some of the things that they had said. Also using the profile can help you develop more strategic questions based on what you learn from the profile. Is this something that your organization does, or do you find, the profile says that they may be required to do these tasks? Is that something that's really important with your organization? And as well as some of these sample ones that I've put up on the slide, which documents give employees the biggest challenge? What types of written material are employees, what type of written materials are employees required to refer to? Is there a need for teamwork? Or are employees required to work in a team? Are there problems meeting deadlines or solving problems? Things like that. So the more strategic questions become based more on what we've learned so far to date. So also, after I've done some of the brainstorming and the open-ended questions, and then doing a bit more of the strategic questions, then we go into using some of the tools. So there's two tools that I like to use. Well, there's three. The profile is the first one. The next two, one's called a workplace survey, and one's called an organizational needs assessment. Now they're slightly different. I find I can use them somewhat interchangeably depending on what it is, what kind of information it is I'm looking to gather, and based on what I've heard so far in the meeting. And again, this may be a second meeting going back, depending on the amount of time that I've been at the employer's place. So the links are there, and also I've done screenshots of each of the documents. That's the word I was looking for, documents. So there's a sample of the workplace survey and what it looks like. So basically the survey is a survey where you would give it to employers, and they would answer questions on whether they strongly agree, strongly disagree, agree, or strongly agree to these basic statements around different workplace essential skills that their employees would use in the workplace. Sometimes it comes up with some issues that they may not have addressed, that they may not have realized were issues as they read through these. You may be going through the writing one where they're saying, well, yes, they don't complete these forms correctly, and it's not so much about the document, it's about writing clearly and concisely, which is another one we've heard from the home support worker groups that we've worked with. So the next tool that I use can be the organizational needs assessment, and again, it breaks down this. Both of these slides are on reading. So instead of asking for a survey, this one is just where an employer would check which items employees are required to do for reading within their occupation. And it gets more complex. The tasks get more complex as you go down. So all of these tools help to get a clearer picture of what the needs are, what the tasks are and where the challenges are what the perceived challenges are from the employer's perspective. Now I do have a question that came in. It says, do employers approach you or Wes, or employers, approach you or Wes, or do you outreach to employers you think may need help? And how we do it here in New Brunswick is we generally have employers referred to us by other government agencies or other agencies. So lots of times we'll hear from the enterprise networks. They will refer employers to us. The employment division of PEDAL will refer employers. And sometimes other agencies will refer employers, like we've had NALD and the Literacy Coalition have referred employers as well. So, and sometimes once we have a referral, we have worked with an employer, for example, one of the home support agencies, we worked with one of them, and then they were at a meeting, a provincial meeting with all different, the Association of Home Support Workers, and they mentioned the program to another agency which called us in turn. So that's generally the way that we get referrals, and sometimes we will do presentations to enterprise networks around our region. Okay, so the next slide talks about a meeting with potential learners. So after I get the employer's perspective and I talk to HR, and I try to do that same whole process with one or two managers or supervisors of people in the occupations that they're looking to train, and get all that information from both of those, then we would go back and do a focus group with potential learners that may be taking the training. And again, it's a very similar process. It's very brainstorming and facilitated focus group where we ask questions, try and initially we would explain what the essential skills training is and how it would benefit them. We asked lots of questions, again, open-ended questions. Tell me about their job. What do you find most challenging? What would you change if you could? And we also try and compare the tasks in our profile to date with the tasks that the employees have to do on their job. So, and we also use the information that we've learned from previous meetings with the employer. So for example, with a home support agency, different ones that I've met with, again, some of the similar things we hear is that documentation isn't completed properly, or employees have a hard time saying no to clients when clients are asking them to do something that isn't safe. So when I'm talking to the employees, I would spin that around and say, do you find it difficult when a client or one of your clients asks you to do something, you're not really supposed to do it, but who's going to do it for this poor woman if you don't do it? So we get to the place where we can talk from their perspective on how that feels and what kind of issues and challenges that raises. So all the time trying to what we call validate the profile, where we are making the generic profile that we've taken off the website very employer specific. So by the time we're done all this organizational needs assessment, we'll have created a profile that is very specific to that organization. So it'll talk about the documents that are completed in that organization. It'll talk about the oral communication challenges that the employees in that particular organization face and are required to address. And it looks like we might have another question. Okay, so this question says, are employees consulted as part of the organizational needs assessment or just the employer, manager, HR? And that's kind of funny because I just addressed that, but I know this question has come in. But just in case there was some technical difficulties and the person who asked the question wasn't able to hear, yes, we certainly meet with the employees as well to discuss, where they feel the challenges in their position is, what they would find most challenging and what they would change if they could. Just questions to help ensure that what the profile says they do in the run of a day is actually what they do. So the next slide talks about validating the profile, and again, this is something I've kind of alluded to all along. During all of these meetings, I gather information to make that profile. I change that profile to be specific to the particular organization that we're working with, look at the tasks specific to the organization, and then when we get into assessing the learners, we assess them to those tasks and see if they have the ability to do those tasks and which tasks we need to train on within each essential skill or essential skills that are targeted for the training. So again, we talked about meeting with the managers, supervisors. I will, once the document is somewhat complete, and I've made as many changes as I can, I will ask the managers or supervisors to look at the different sections that we're going to train on and make sure that they are clear and specific, that I've used the right context and right words to reflect the organization, as well as discuss the sections with the potential learners or the people who are actually doing the job to make sure that it's really clear. And the last step of this webinar would be to recruit the learners. So in the St. John region, or here with Wes, we really prefer to keep training voluntary. We don't really like employers to say, well, you know what, Susie, you have to take it, but Jane, you're okay, so you don't really need to take it, or, you know, Bobby, Sue, you need to take it. So we really like to make it voluntary. So in order to do that, we like to do learner information sessions where we would go in and speak to any of the employees who are interested in taking the training and describe what an adult learning environment is like, what that means, how that works, how it's different than when you were in high school or college, and also promote the benefits of the training to the learners, because the features of the training are not necessarily always intriguing, but the benefits. So if I was doing this learner information session to home support workers, I might say things like, have you ever had to deal with a client who was, or an angry family member of a client who was mad because, and yelling at you because you weren't doing things that she felt you should be doing, but you also knew you weren't supposed to be doing them. Have you ever felt that you would like to learn strategies to deal with that more effectively? And lots of times in the learner orientation or learner information, you'll see the heads nodding. Yes, that happens to me all the time, and no, I hate that, and I really don't know what to say, and I just feel almost bullied into doing what I know I'm not supposed to do. So each learner information session is created based on the information from the organizational needs assessment to really get at those learners who could really benefit from the training. And that is the end of my webinar. I've got a couple of questions. Oh, and I see there's one more. It says, suppose that you identify that the learner has a learning disability. How would you deal with the issue? So identifying that a learner has a learning disability would probably happen during the assessment, the learner assessment phase, which I haven't talked about, and which also is not part of the job that I do. It's part of the assessment officer's position. I do understand a little bit, so I can answer a little bit, but I'm not 100% sure exactly. I think I know how to do it, but I'm not sure. So I'll give you my answer, and hopefully that'll help a little bit. I do know that if a learner identifies they have a learning disability and they've already had an assessment done, then we would, with their permission, we would give that assessment to the trainer with the ideas that would help the trainer design training more specifically for that learner. If the assessment officer figures that the learner might have a learning disability, she would talk to them about that a little bit. With their permission, she could do a screening for success, just a basic screening to see if she thinks they have a learning disability, and then we could send them for an assessment and again get the report back and use the recommendations that are in that report to help. The trainer would use those recommendations to help develop training. And then lots of times, not lots of times, but I have noticed in the past, a lot of learners, by the time we reach them, they've already figured out their own strategies for dealing with their learning disability, and so long as they communicate those to the trainer or the assessment officer, then we'll certainly incorporate those into any of our training. So that looks like it. Thanks so much, and Maureen, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Mary Lou. I'd like to thank you for coming in to present to us today. I really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us today. It was a great pleasure to have so many people from such varied sectors of the community take part in our webinar. If you have any further questions or follow-up for Mary Lou or myself, please feel free to contact me at maureen@nb.literacy.ca. Again, thank you, Mary Lou. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye.